This is the Team Performance Podcast, where we explore issues at the heart of leadership, team development, and organisational culture. I'm your host, Mark Gilroy, and in this episode, we're joined by Emma Coller, co-founder of Growth Pod. Emma and I talk about her experiences of the police force and her transformative journey into the world of coaching, leadership, and culture work. Among other topics, we dive into job crafting, and Emma shares a great framework to help teams address burnout. Welcome to the latest episode in our series of interviews. I'm so happy to be joined by the wonderfully talented Emma Coller today from Growth Pod. So Emma and her business partner Chris are expert trainers and coaches. They focus on leadership, culture, and well-being, amongst many other things. Thank you so much for joining us, Emma.
Oh, thanks for asking me, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, me too. And I thought maybe before we get started, it's probably worth saying that we do know each other outside of this conversation, don't we? And we've known each other for quite a long time. We met when we did our ILM coaching mentoring training back in 2016, which is, that's insane that it's been that long. And you've just been on quite a big journey at the start of all of that, which I'm sure we'll get around to talking about at some point in this conversation. But maybe a good place to start is with your own leadership journey. Can you say a bit more about your first experiences of leadership, either positive or negative?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am a retired police officer. I guess that's the first place to start with. I joined the police service. My first experience of leadership was my sergeant on my shift. And it was not a good experience of leadership because I experienced bullying by him and also harassment on the grounds of my sex at that particular time. So I had around 2 years of what should have been an incredible experience, being a new police officer and feeling that this person was there to encourage me and help me grow and develop and all the good stuff that you would expect a leader to do, and had the real opposite experience of that. And actually, it took me a long time to work out what was happening, which sounds really crazy, but I didn't realize what was happening. It was my first real big job. And it was actually someone else that eventually uncovered what was happening through a whole host of issues that I won't go into right now. And it pretty much broke me. I remember for those first 2 years really thinking, this is not the job for me. I'm in the wrong place. This is not a place where I am ever going to thrive or flourish, without realizing that actually it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was him and the environment that I was working in. Eventually, it was revealed and he was formally sanctioned as a result of his behaviour, but I got moved. And that's quite typical in the police service. And I think in lots of organisations where people have experienced bullying, they get moved quite often, which of course is the worst thing that you could do and sets a really bad tone for an organisational culture. And then when I did move, I was put onto a new shift with 3 of the most incredible leaders that I would say, even to this day, that I've ever had. They were so supportive. It was the first time that I was able to flourish as a police officer and really find my way. And they didn't do a huge amount. They were just there. They were supportive. They were almost a protective measure. And going from one extreme to the other was a really interesting part of my journey that I guess I didn't really understand at the time, but is something that really now is so significant in my journey of what I do in Growth Pod, because that's shaped the way that I see leadership and understand leadership, having experienced 2 extremes of it.
I have a few friends who are still in the police force now, and I remember sort of talking with them over a drink about some of the stuff they get up to. It seems to me, as an outsider, that whilst there's an awful lot of support on offer, the story that I keep hearing is that it's quite unusual for people to ask for help or even to admit that some support is needed when, in truth, they've actually witnessed something incredibly traumatic. And yeah, I remember having a conversation with one of my friends, and I said to him, it sounds like there's a lot of deception within the culture of the police force. And he thought for a while and he said, yeah, that's probably quite fair. We deceive ourselves a lot about the fact that most people don't ask for help, even though there's all sorts on offer when it comes to these types of things. And because there's, situations like you've just described going on, that can sometimes then permeate into the way that people treat them, their teams and their staff. It's actually stuff gets hidden quite quickly.
Yeah, and I talk about this a lot in the work that I do right now when people talk about these kinds of issues, and they'll say, they'll internalize it as a they issue. And I'm really clear about helping people to understand whether it's a they issue or it's a culture issue. So yes, things are hidden. I think still in the police service, even now, we've seen some really toxic behavior emerge and, to a real extreme. It's not often the individual. And so why don't people feel able to speak up and speak out about these things? Why don't they approach the supportive mechanisms in place within the organisation when they need it? And it's not because they don't have the skills or the tools to do that. It's there. It's because the culture is a toxic culture, and it's the culture that creates this environment that means that people aren't able to do what they need to do. That they can't go and ask for that support because there's this very macho kind of culture of, you're a police officer, you should be able to just get on and do the things that you need to do, and you shouldn't be asking for support, you should just be able to do it. So some of the language that's used within the culture of the organisation is what prevents people from accessing those things. It's not a they issue, it's a cultural issue. And that's because of poor leadership, because of the stories that are told within the organisation, all of the things that we know about culture. And it needs changing fundamentally.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's really cool about the story that you told there is that in switching and being moved and having that experience of really positive leadership, really supportive leadership, where you were able to flourish, you've kind of found yourself now, 20 years later, in a situation where you are able to empower other people in a similar way. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So the business that I've got now, you'll probably even see my whole demeanor and tone change as I'm talking about two different things. And to be fair, Mark, I don't often talk about policing. I spoke to someone about it the other day. It was yesterday. And she was like, I can't believe that you used to be a police officer. What, I didn't know that about you, because it's not something that I really discuss. I'm quite sort of trauma informed, so I understand the triggers sometimes that that creates for me. But my business now is a business that really helps to create organizational cultures where people can thrive. And it's a bit weird. I love plants. You'll probably see I don't know if you can see plants behind me, but my house is full of plants. I've got about 100 house plants. And I love an analogy as well, or a metaphor to help understand these things. And so I always think about, every plant has something within it that's beautiful, and it flourishes, whether that's some kind of greenery or whether it's a beautiful flower that it's able to produce. But if you don't get the soil and the environment right, it's never ever going to produce that beautiful, beautiful flower that's deep within it, that just will sprout up and give everybody so much pleasure and joy, the whole world, pleasure and joy from the flower that it produces. And ultimately, that's what culture is. It's about finding the right soil that enables people to flourish and thrive. And so our whole business is based on that. It's based on creating the right soil, the right environment in organizations that everybody can just be and do their best, so that we can see their gifts and be able to help them to show those and be proud of them in a powerful way that helps serve the whole world, their clients, whatever service they're providing, but also, of course, each other in terms of their colleagues.
I love that analogy. And and particularly because I've got two little ones, that's making me think about a Disney film that came out a few years ago called Encanto, which is about a family who have kind of special gifts. The whole story is about gifts. And one of the family members has a special gift of being able to grow flowers or anything to do with plants. Isabella, her name is, and there's a point in the film where actually she grows something else. She grows a cactus rather than this beautiful like a beautiful flower in bloom, and the start of the song is I just made something unexpected, something sharp, something pure, I think. But it's about, I think within that idea of kind of creating the conditions, actually you can help people be more authentic, more credible, more real, more open. And that's an incredible gift to be able to give to people.
Absolutely. And I love cacti. I've got lots of those as well, and succulents, and they need really, really different soil, really different soil. And I've got one on my windowsill right now, Mark, and it's got the most beautiful pink flower on you could ever wish to see. So even they produce flowers.
Shall we talk about a little bit more about your journey out of the police force and sort of what happened there? And because I mean, having seen you sort of at that time, sort of 7 years ago, you were still kind of letting go of that identity. There was a kind of I don't know, I have this image in my head of someone who's holding on. It's making me think about Gladiators. We watched Gladiators on a Saturday night, and of somebody who's holding on to one ring and is also holding on to another, and actually it was kind of swinging, and actually you know which way you want to swing, but maybe now actually this is a really strong anchor here, and a big part of your identity that you were getting ready to let go of. What was that like?
Oh my God, I love that. I love that, yeah. It was really scary. So if I help you to understand the movement out of the police service, because it's quite an unusual process, I guess, that I went through. So I'd had this period of real toxic leadership initially in the first couple of years, and I was really struggling with that. Eventually, of course, as I've just described, I moved on, and then I took a position up in leadership training. So I spent the majority of my career in leadership training. It often sounds quite strange as to why I do what I do right now when I used to be a police officer. But really what I do now is pretty much what I did in the police for the majority of my policing career. Leadership training, diversity training, obviously law legislation as well. And I'd always had this kind of idea that I wanted to pursue that to a greater extent. And I eventually was moved out of training into another department because the police service decided that they were going to civilianise the training department, or the majority of the training department. So those of us who weren't kept within training got moved into other departments, and I ended up being put into the public protection unit and specialised in investigating crimes against children, which was really, really tough and not a place I would have ever chosen to go, but found myself there. And I started to experience significant burnout in that department. It was really challenging for me. And my husband was kind of getting ready to retire. So in the police at that time, you did 30 years of service and then you left. And he'd always said to me, Emma, once I've retired, there's some kind of financial benefits that come with that. Then if you want to leave, you can leave. So I'd always had that in mind, that that's probably what I would do, because, I always felt like I didn't really fit into the environment. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to put this. Now, I see this as a really fortunate thing, but a lot of people find that hard, that I see it this way. I was diagnosed with a very rare brain condition, and I became very, very ill very quickly. And I was collapsing on a regular basis, and I was told that I needed to have quite serious brain surgery, quite major brain surgery. And I ended up having to have major brain surgery, which I also just my luck ended up with meningitis. Also afterwards, it was a potential, so it impacted my recovery. So I was in intensive care for quite a long time, and then quite a big recovery. And I never went back to work. So the police service basically said, you're a risk to us now. We can't bring you back. You can't do the role that you were employed to do, which was absolutely right. That's correct, what they were saying. I was too high risk to be a police officer. It wasn't something that I could do anymore because I've got part of my skull and spine missing now. And I never went back to work. They medically retired me from my sick leave. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. So at that point that I met you, I was just in that period of coming out. And whilst it was something that I still wanted to do, and it was something that I'd thought about, it was always going to be on my terms, whereas this time it was, it was forced upon me because of the brain condition. And so when I love how you described being held onto those two rings, and that was so true for me because my identity was completely entrenched in being a police officer, and I didn't know how I was ever going to get out of that. But yeah, I was still holding on to this other ring, feeling this real sense of relief that actually I wasn't going to work there anymore, and that I had this whole new life that I could build and explore. But it was a really frightening time, and obviously we are friends outside of this as well. And there were lots of support that you gave me through that as well, which was incredible. And it's so interesting how sometimes the worst of times can be the best of times as well. And that really, kind of triggered me, bounced me into where I'm at right now. And I couldn't be more grateful that I had brain surgery, which I know sounds crazy. There's some real dark days, don't get me wrong. There were some real challenges that I faced through my recovery. But as I look back on that with a very optimistic view that I have anyway, I just see that as such a blessing in my life to get me to where I'm at right now.
And for me, Emma, I think looking at the way you frame that and you've described that, that's probably one of the reasons it worked out the way it did, because of your viewpoint. You just radiate optimism, and you look for the good, and you look for the opportunities everywhere. I've seen you do it so many times. And I've no doubt that was a big driving factor in allowing you to let go of that other ring and move in the direction that life's now taking you. So it's incredible.
Thank you. And I have always been very optimistic. And from my retirement and being able to really take control of my own learning and development, in being able to shape it in my own way, I then found this concept of positive psychology and became hooked on positive psychology. And I've spent the last 8 years researching, learning, taking courses, meeting people who are positive psychologists. I've been really fortunate to study under one of the world leading positive psychologists as well. And actually I realized that what I do in terms of my optimism and how I see the world is something that I've learned over many, many years, but it's a skill that everybody can learn. And that's a game changer when we suddenly realize that everybody can see the silver lining, everyone can see the cup as being half full rather than half empty. It's about having the tools to be able to learn how to do that. And that's a lot of that is what I now bring to my work. Having the ability to be able to teach people those tools, those skills, those those kind of methods is so powerful in terms of being able to change how people view themselves, how they view their work, how they view the world around them. And not just for them, but that has a ripple effect. So I have this very utopian vision as well, that by helping just one person, we're actually helping to change the whole world. Because when that person has those skills and they're doing that for themselves, we know that we've got these mirror neurons. We know that emotions are contagious. Science is showing us all of these incredible things right now. That person takes that into their world, and that has a ripple effect on their friends, their family, their community. When they buy their groceries at the end of the day and they're stood in the checkout and having a nice conversation with someone, it impacts them. We see this ripple effect, and that's why I do what I do, I guess. It's so incredible that we can learn those skills to be able to take us on that journey.
Thinking about your experience of burnout, I know that's one of those things that you now support people with. I don't know if you found this in your work, but it's just a word that seems to keep coming up more and more often, certainly in the work that we do. Entire teams who are experiencing it, leaders who are experiencing burnout. And I don't know, I find myself wondering, what is it about this cultures that we've built that make burnout so intense and frequent?
Yeah, and I think there's different elements to this. I think that we've always had burnout, but we haven't had the language to talk about it. So when I look back on my own career, I recognize in the last sort of 3 years or so of my service, I was in burnout. I couldn't have told you that I was in burnout because I didn't have the language to explain it as burnout. I didn't know what the facets of burnout were. So I guess there's going to be lots of people. And so the research that we've currently got around burnout and understanding it, the World Health Organization have defined burnout, and just actually having that definition to work to helps us to create a connection to something that we look at and think, yeah, that's what I'm experiencing. Of course, burnout is very specific to workplaces, and I think sometimes we misuse the language as well a little bit. So people might talk about being in burnout when actually they're not. So we have to educate people about what does that actually really mean. You know, some of us haven't got language to describe how we feel quite often. So, for example, we'll often get people say they're stressed, and actually they're not stressed, it's something else, but they don't have the correct emotional language to describe what they're really feeling. That's really important that we teach people language to help them describe how they're feeling. So some people will use the word burnout or stress without it actually being really what they feel. So I think we have to be mindful of that. But also I think we have to recognize that our organizations have a huge part to play in this. I had the real privilege of listening to Amy Rosnowski speak on a live session that I attended a few nights ago. So I think you know Amy Rosnowski. Well, I don't know if you know her personally, she's incredible. But Amy Rosnowski is responsible for this concept of job crafting and finding purpose and meaning in our jobs, and saying that many of us, we do that anyway, but how do we support organizations to deliberately support job crafting? And I'm a huge fan of job crafting, and I prefer it much more than appraisal systems. And someone said to her, as a question was, what do we do in organizations where people don't feel aligned to their job? And she said, I'm going to be really bold now. And she said that is down to the organization. The organization has created the environment that means that people don't like their jobs. And we're now reaping the rewards of that, that the organizations have, if you just think about something like the topic or the concept of a whole department, human resources. We've described humans as resources for however many years. We've created an environment where we've taught humans that they are resources. They are just a means to an end within our organization. We haven't put our people first, we've put our outcomes first. And all of those things that we've done in our organizations have created an environment. It's the soil that we've tended, and we've tended the soil, and we've created these toxic work environments that, and then we wonder why we've got burnout. And I think generationally, there will be parents of children, maybe at my sort of age. I've got a 14-year-old, although I had my child a bit later in life, and a lot of my friends of a similar age to me have got much older children who are now entering into the workplace. And the conversations that they've heard around the dinner table from their parents about what it means to work and how hard and challenging it is means that we're now seeing a new generation of people going into organizations saying, no, I'm not having that. COVID had a huge impact on it as well, where we said, we're not doing this anymore. Why are we working in these ways that actually don't serve any of us positively? And so I think that when we look at this concept of burnout, people are more aware of it. They understand what it means more, but they're more aware of their environment and the impact that that's having on their ways of working. And I think this new generation are really going to be pushing back to say, no, we're not coming into your workplaces, and we're not going to work in those kinds of ways that you've traditionally believed are required, when actually we can show you that there's a different way. And in that different way, we can have a really amazing life-work balance. We can still provide an incredible service. We can still create incredible goods in our organizations, but it doesn't have to look like it has done before.
Yeah, I can really resonate with that. I think when you look at sort of certain exemplars that have sprung up over the last 10, 20 years, particularly in the kind of sales industry, there was a word that came up a while ago. I think it's called the grind set. This attitude that in order to have success in life, whether you define success as money or any other way, in order to have success in life, you should just keep on going, even though it's hard, even though it's tough, even though you feel stressed, even though you feel that you might fall over. Just keep on going, because it will get better. and you will get to that thing that you really want. And I've heard, you'll probably have had this in your coaching practice, where people will just have fallen into that narrative of, oh my gosh, and this doesn't feel right, and I feel like I'm about to break, but I know I should probably keep on pushing because something good will happen. And usually that gets reinforced by other people, particularly if they have the similar sort of grind set attitude. And you just go, no, you don't do that. It's really, really bad for you. And I think you almost have to like bump up against it in order to feel how bad for you that can really be.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, grind set, I think is a really nice way of thinking about the narrative that we've created. But of course, our society has created that narrative around this is what success looks like. You know, for so long we've equated success with being busy. You know, the busier you appeared to be, then the more successful you were. And we're seeing people working smarter now, not harder. And of course, I'm pretty sure most people have had a product at some point in their lives with this logo, keep calm and carry on. It's a very British cultural thing to do. And it's dangerous, it's toxic. And also within the positive psychology work that I do, it's about teaching and helping people to understand that we've all been on the hedonic treadmill. There's different types of happiness that we talk about in positive psychology. So hedonic happiness is this immediate kind of high that we get from things. So when the new shoes drop on the doorstep, in my case, or the new bag, which is just over there that I ordered yesterday. But we have a baseline of happiness. And so we get this peak and then we come back to it. And those things we have been, I think, sadly, kind of falsely provided with this kind of concept that those things will bring us happiness and bring us joy, and we'll get more of those things because we work hard and because we're successful and we'll earn more money. The other type of happiness is eudaimonic happiness, which is a sense of purpose. It's a sense of meaning. And eudaimonic happiness lasts. It lasts. It serves as it helps us to build a really strong internal well-being system, as opposed to hedonic happiness, which we end up on the hedonic treadmill. We need more and more and more and more and more. And it's not sustainable, right? So I think our organizations, our businesses have had us on the hedonic treadmill. You know, if you get the next promotion, you're going to be happy. You know, if you get all the clients, you're going to be successful. You know, all this kind of narrative that we've bought into, of course we have. Whereas now I think what we're seeing is a real change in this more eudaimonic happiness. I appreciate that organizations and people are not using that kind of language. They've probably never heard of it before. But it's about having a sense of purpose and meaning in your work. To go back to Amy Rosnowski's work, Jane Dutton, Justin Berg's work around job crafting. You know, the whole point of job crafting is being able to craft your work with purpose and meaning, finding a real connection point within the work that you do that helps you to understand that it's bigger than who you are as an individual. Who am I serving? Who am I impacting on a day-to-day basis? And we're now seeing organisations uptake that. You know, they're doing more work around job crafting. Certainly the organisations that we work with, when we introduce it as a concept, they love the idea of it. So I've just been training some people around job crafting, and it was the biggest thing in the leadership training that everybody took and said, what is this job crafting? I need to know more about it. Emma, help us to do this, because that's going to change our business. That's going to change our culture. And it does. It absolutely does, when we can craft our work with meaning and purpose. And that's what we're seeing now in organizations. And we see certainly from different generations that they absolutely want that purpose in their work. And we can all find it. Everybody's got purpose in their work. We just forget the purpose that we've got in our work because we don't talk about it. We don't push it. We don't discuss it. We don't keep it up front and center. Instead, we keep the outcomes as the focus, and it's the wrong way around.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you were describing that, I kind of had a kind of really cynical, old school dinosaur CEO voice in my head going, oh, that sounds very fluffy and very nice. And oh my goodness, yeah, of course people can create their own jobs. Why not? And it's totally the wrong way to look at it, because it's completely evidence-based that, you know, personalizing your work in a way that allows you to connect with it on a really deep, meaningful, purposeful way has with tangible benefits across the board. And actually, if you change one thing and it was that, you'd find that there was benefits on the bottom line. It would massively contribute to performance, engagement, retention, talent, all the things that organizations who maybe are less considerate about what they might call the softer side of managing a workforce, they would care about them. So it's a shame that hasn't become much more of a prevalent thing, I guess, in most working cultures.
Yeah, and I think that I'm a huge fan of language. I think language is so important. There's this really lovely quote that I use a lot: "Our words create our worlds. Our words create our worlds." And so even then, we talk about soft skills. And I'm not a fan of the language of soft skills. They're human skills, and the human skills that we need to develop to support people, whether that's in our workplaces, in our schools, whether that's in our communities, are so vital for us to get all of this right. If we could just flex our human skills a little bit more regularly, we could make a massive difference, a huge change. They're not soft, they're actually incredibly hard. They're incredibly hard to get after and develop. I think people see them as these kind of fluffy things in organizations, and I've absolutely had conversations, Mark, with people with that. I remember talking to a guy who owned a business who said, "Well-being? Why would we bring well-being in our organization? I'm not here to support people, I'm here to make them work." And I was like, okay, good luck with that.
So are you able to share a bit more about how you support people with burnout when it comes to some of your work and your practices?
Yeah, so burnout is, as I said, defined now by the World Health Organization. Do you want me to share how they describe it?
Yes. Yeah. How do they define it?
So burnout is defined by the World Health Organization as a syndrome. They conceptualize it with these three different dimensions. So the first one is a feeling of energy depletion or exhaustion. So we just don't feel any energy. We feel exhausted by our work. There is an increased mental distance from our job, or we feel kind of negative about our job, or we end up with this kind of very cynical belief around our job. That's the second dimension. And then the third one is a reduced professional efficacy, which really relates to the fact that we don't feel like we've got the empowerment, the autonomy, or the skills to do our job anymore. So it's really unique to each person what burnout means. And the current research, Mark, is saying to us that about 1 in 5 people are experiencing burnout in the workplace, which is really significant. So to support people regarding burnout, I use Paula Davis's work. So Paula Davis wrote this incredible book called Beating Burnout at Work. And she's a positive psychologist, and she teaches lots of people, including the army, about resilience. And she's basically found that there are these 6 shields, I call them shields, 6 shields that when we hold up in our organizations, they actually prevent burnout at a team level. So I imagine them very much like, these 6 shields all being put kind of very neatly next to each other, all in this circle, and we're all stood inside of the circle as a team. And these shields prevent burnout from coming in and having this impact on us. So when I support organizations around burnout, I talk about how teams are the secret to preventing burnout, using Paula Davis's work. And the 6 shields she calls primed. So each of the shields, through this mnemonic primed, stand for different elements. And what we have to do is build those into the fabric of our organization. And if we build them successfully into the fabric of our organization, then we are preventing burnout from happening in the first place. Now, I also think that when it comes to holding these shields up, that sometimes we're already in burnout and we don't have the strength to hold them up. So as a team, we have to help other people sometimes hold those shields, or we have to hold them up on their behalf. So there's 1 in 5, they might not be strong enough to hold the shields up right now, but if we can get after that collectively as a group of people, as an organization, as a team, as a department, whatever that looks like, hopefully the whole organization, then as we start to build those pillars into the fabric, it really makes such a vital difference in helping us not end up in burnout in the first place.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I like the idea of teams being the secret, that actually burnout isn't something that one person can always manage by themselves, because like you say, if they're already in that phase of experiencing burnout, they probably wouldn't have the strength. That actually a team working together can help be a bit of a support for other people to lean on.
Yeah, so in all of the work that we do, we use a system science approach. I don't know if you have heard of positive psychology. System science as a concept, but system science is understanding the interconnected nature of human systems. So if you imagine a bike and you took a bike apart, all of the pieces of a bike work independently. They all have their own individual function. But when you bring that bike together, it becomes more than the sum of its parts, and it creates its own rhythm of movement. Now, if the back wheel of that bike broke, for example, and you sent someone off and said, go buy us a new back wheel for this bike, and they came back with this BMX tire, and actually we've got a racing bike, it's going to completely change the dynamics. We do that all the time in organizations. We put interventions in place without stepping back and seeing the system as a whole and how that system interconnects. So when it comes to thinking about anything around change interventions, whether that's well-being or otherwise, you have to make sure that you look at it from a systems science lens. What are the interconnections of the system? So when it comes to anything around well-being, many organizations are doing some great work around creating well-being charters. By themselves, they don't work. You have to then have a look at what are the team doing, and you have to also support the individual. So we call it me, we, and us, the three layers of system science. Me as an individual, we as a team, us as the organization. And there's an interconnection, because what each of those do when they come to work impacts on the next layer and all the way back down again. So what the organization does impacts on the team and the individual. What the individual is doing and how they're coming to work impacts on the team and the organization, etc. So we see this interconnection. So when it comes to designing interventions, we need to be really mindful of system science, because if you just write governance, it's not going to work. I had just a very quick example of this a few weeks ago, where someone came to me and said, we've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds training our leaders, and it's not having the desired impact. Why? And I said, well, have you got your people ready for your new leaders? Do they know how to get the best out of your leaders? Have you given them the information? Oh, no. Have you got governance in place that will support your leaders implementing their new leadership work? No. Well, then that's why it's not working, because you've just sent a load of people off on this incredible leadership course. They've all learned all these new skills, and now they come back into their workplace. It's like bringing aliens back into the company. And everyone's going, why are our leaders using this new language? What are they trying to do with us? We don't understand it. And of course, we move away from change if we don't understand it. So the same with any intervention, we have to use a system science approach. So when we talk about primed as a model for preventing burnout, it's only one element within the system that we need to get after. Of course, we also need to teach people the skills to be able to proactively manage their well-being, as well as having amazing well-being governance. So when it comes to burnout, yes, we want to have the shields in place. And I'm happy to tell you what the shields are if you want to know what they are. But also, we have to not just stop there. We have to help individuals proactively manage and navigate their own well-being, and then have governance that supports it as well.
Yeah, a couple of episodes ago, we had a guest on called Andy Fieldhouse, who's a Dubai-based team coach, and he talked about organizational relationship systems coaching, which is very much intertwined with what you've just been talking about, actually being always seeking to see the interactions and the dynamics of the system, rather than just getting into the grass of the team and the weeds of the team and seeing them operating in isolation. It's always about the interactions. And I think one of the coolest things about the kind of work that we do, you know, as coaches, but also as sort of facilitators, is that we help the team reveal itself to itself as a system. It's almost like holding a mirror up and saying, well, did you see that? Did that just happen there? Did you notice that thing that just happened? Did you notice that reaction? What do we think about that? So it's almost like lifting this lens up and showing them, revealing the system to itself is one of the greatest gifts that we get to do, I think, in our work. Sometimes you need a tool to do it. Sometimes, you know, psychometrics and surveys and tools can be really helpful, but sometimes actually it can be done through a really kind of skillful facilitation and some great questions and observations.
Absolutely, yeah. And we do full cultural reviews in organizations. We'll go into a big organization, and we'll do a full cultural review on them and find out what they're doing that's really great, what the strengths to retain, and what where are the gaps that they need to develop on. And all of the interventions that we put in place and our recommendations are always with a system science lens. So always understanding that you need to make sure that any intervention, any gap that you're trying to sort of make smaller, it has to be done with the interconnection of the whole of the system, not just at one layer of the system. Otherwise, it simply doesn't work.
Mm. When it comes to the shields, then, Emma, I appreciate we've got the author and we've got the book, and I'll make sure that's captured in the show notes. If anyone wants to go really deep into this, do you want to give us a little walkthrough of that, and maybe pick out some areas or patterns that you notice in the work that you've done with this model, what teams really, maybe there's a particular area or a shield that seems to come through as a recurring need or area that teams really find helpful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So the model is called Primed, Primed, and the first shield, P, is psychological safety. R is for relationships. I is for impact. M is for mental strength. E is for energy, and D is for design. So the first shield relates to psychological safety. Now, we know from the research around psychological safety, which is significant but emerging, there's so much more to psychological safety than I think we originally thought about through the concept that Amy Edmondson brought, of course, this concept to us. We can see that psychological safety helps to create high performance in organizations. It's a very subjective process. It means different things to different people. But psychological safety, as we know, is when we feel safe at work, when we feel psychologically safe to contribute, to innovate, to shout up, to speak up, to talk out. We bring our A game, we bring our best selves when we feel psychologically safe to do so. So psychological safety is a really important part to preventing burnout within an organization. So I feel fully included as a member of my team, and I feel psychologically safe. There's lots and lots of work still emerging in this space. I think it's a really interesting space to keep an eye out for. And I love to observe and read all of the current and new research that's coming out on psychological safety, because it just has such a big impact on teams. And I think psychological safety is one of those pieces that as a concept, many of us understand, but we don't know how to get after. So one of the biggest things for us in terms of our business and how we support organizations is helping them to understand psychological safety and be able to measure and monitor it. And we do a lot of that when we do our cultural reviews. So we ask very specific questions around psychological safety to support them to understand it in more detail. I think a lot of people think that is that's one of those fluffy soft skills, but actually having it in place it makes the world of difference. Absolutely does.
Which again, back to language, is so interesting, isn't it? That people might think that why would you not want teams and individuals to feel safe? Even take psychologically away from it. Safety, providing an atmosphere of safety for people seems so fundamentally important. How could you possibly see that as soft?
Yeah.
I think actually, Mike, if I could try and answer that from a kind of the furrow-brow cynical CEO voice in my head, who kind of comes up every now and again, that character, I could imagine there being a sort of dinosaur old school leader who would go, oh well, does that mean we're creating environments where people can't be challenged and where we have to create bubble wrap for all of our teams and leaders? And of course, that's the sort of person who hasn't read around what psychological safety really means. It goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some really very easy practical steps that we can put in place to create psychological safety. I love Timothy Clark's work. He talks about 4 layers of psychological safety, or 4 steps. So it's inclusion safety. We've got learning safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. And even when I think about learning safety, and this is a big one for me, it's teaching people how to fall forward. We all fall. Every single one of us falls, physically and metaphorically. But it's in that moment again, thinking about how our words create our worlds, that when we fall, the language that we use for ourselves and the language that we use to others when they fall as well makes the difference between whether someone feels psychologically safe to have a go next time. So sometimes we fall, it's just like a little slip. Sometimes, we find ourselves very, ungracefully flat out on our backs. But in that moment, we can either stay on the floor, which is what humans tend to prefer to do because, we're hurt and we feel shame about, what's just happened. But actually, again, it's a skill. It's a skill that can be learned, that we teach people how to fall forward. So in that moment of falling, there is an incredible opportunity to grow. And how do we help people to understand that actually when we don't get things right, we get better. So when it comes to psychological safety, actually, even just using that layer, that level of learning safety, we can teach people how to fall forward in our organizations. And as leaders, we can be really mindful of the language that we use, and not just the language, but also our body language, our micro behavior. How often have you seen someone make a mistake and you might have maybe not even said anything, but just rolled your eyes or, looked at someone in a certain way that produces that shame in that person? But the reality is we all make mistakes, and shame is a really interesting emotion that has a real impact on our ability to move forward. Psychological safety, even if we just think about it from the perspective of learning safety, there's some really interesting things that we can do immediately to start creating more safety. And I'm not talking about people who consistently fall, because we need to have different conversations, of course, with them. But, if we don't have a go, if we don't try things out and make mistakes, how are we ever going to grow and innovate and get better?
I've recently started getting back into running again after a long break. And I read a book about it a little while ago, and in the book, almost jokingly, the author referred to running as the art of falling forwards. And that just came into my head as you were describing Timothy Clark's work. And actually, that thinking about the first people who decided we'll have a go, we'll do a bit of walking, and then maybe we'll upgrade to running. Actually, it is just that. It is the art of falling forwards, and occasionally making sure that you don't fall, or hurt yourself. But you can go so much further when you create the capacity for that to happen, and the improvements that you'll notice are very, very quick. So yeah, it is an art, and everyone has their own way of doing it. But it's something that can be practiced and learnt and trained and honed. And sometimes you need some tools and techniques to help you with it. And sometimes you might need some people cheering you on as you continue on that journey. But it does really help moving forwards.
Absolutely, yeah. Can I just share one more of the shields?
Oh yeah, please.
Do you have time?
Yeah, absolutely.
So relationships, which is the next one. But in relationships, you asked me, in terms of these shields, which one are we seeing more consistently? And I think relationships is one of them, because, we are more technologically connected than we've ever been, but yet we're more socially disconnected than we've ever been. And, humans are social creatures. We need people in whatever guise or form that is. And this is a big one that I'm seeing in organizations regarding burnout right now. This feeling of isolation. We live in this kind of loneliness epidemic that it's often classed as. And, there's really crazy research around like loneliness is the same as smoking, it's the same impact of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. All this kind of really like powerful research that we're seeing about the impact that loneliness has. And I think the more we've moved into these hybrid or new ways of working, particularly working from home or hybrid working, that we're seeing more loneliness. We're seeing a lack of connection, a lack of work relationships. And that for me is a really big one that we need to definitely get after in our workplaces right now. I love working from home. I work from home. I support working from home. I think it's a fabulous thing to do. But there's natural connection points that many of us have had when we've worked in office space, that kind of thing. We've lost them. So we need to really think about how do we create more deliberate connection points for people so that they can come together, and not just for work, but for fun. Why can't we have play in our work? How do we innovate when we're not together? It becomes more challenging. Of course, it's doable. There's lots of tools and great things that we can do, but it doesn't beat coming together, actually being in person, being in a room. And I've seen some organizations doing some really incredible things. There was one that we worked with, and they gave everyone a budget, a connection budget. They all worked from home, but the connection budget was where they could use this fund, a pot of money that they all got given individually, to come together. So what they would do is every so often they would hire a space somewhere in a city centre or wherever it might be, a co-working space, and they would just all go there and work together, and they'd use their budget to pay for that and their travel. So there's some lovely ways that we can do that, but I think that relationships or lack of connection is a huge issue when it comes to burnout. Feeling so isolated and feeling lonely, is an awful place to be. So yeah, I think in terms of those shields, they're all important. I could talk about each one, of course, in a lot of detail, but I think that is a big one that I'm seeing a lot of people struggling with right now in their workplaces.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. I love that idea of a connection budget, and actually the message that conveys just beyond the idea of connecting is saying we will empower you to figure out how you want to do this, rather than just guess how people want to connect on any given.
Creates inclusion from the perspective of psychological safety.
I just love it. That's what I've never heard of anything like that before, and it's so simple. Again, it's one of those sort of exponential growth things where if you make a change and you were to assign some budget towards something, that would have knock-on effects in so many different areas that aren't covered by something as broad as psychological safety.
Yeah.
or burnout, but it would help address so many of them, so many of the challenges we face in so many cultures. Thank you, Emma. That's a really good point for us to start to wrap up. And I just wanted to say a huge thank you for everything that you've shared today, thinking about, your journey out of the police force and into this kind of wonderful world of personal development and growth and coaching and leadership. If people wanted to find out a bit more about you, maybe have a look at some of the other shields in the model or anything else, how can people find out more about you and get in touch with you?
So we've got our website, which is Growth Pod. So our business is called Growth Pod. So I think it's www.growth-pod.co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn, so you could definitely go and find me on LinkedIn. We put lots of information out on there about what we're up to, and I often sometimes put on my LinkedIn page as well. We have a newsletter called Sunday Sage, which we send out each Sunday, and we ask a curious question. So it's kind of a coaching style question to get people to think about their own leadership practice and where they might be able to improve over the course of that week. So you could sign up to that as well.
Super. I'll make sure I include links to all of those in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for joining us, and hopefully you'll be able to join us for another episode in the future.
I'd love to.
If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know by subscribing and leaving a review on your favourite podcast app. Meanwhile, if you're interested to learn more about how the PCS approach can help you explore leadership, performance and culture within your business, get in touch with our team at performanceclimatesystem.com and we'll be happy to help. See you next time with another great guest.